right, we're to chapter 10, which is about muscle. In this chapter, we'll spend a bit of time looking at the anatomy of muscle, and then we'll really spend quite a bit of time talking about the physiology, primarily how it is that muscle contraction actually takes place. Now, if you'll recall, we have three different types of muscle. We have skeletal muscle, which is the very obviously striated muscle, and that's where we'll spend the primary amount of time in this chapter, the majority of time in this chapter, right? But just a reminder, cardiac muscle, right? Its main function is just to propel blood throughout the cardiovascular system, right? Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. Smooth muscle, we're looking here at muscle that's actually helping propel things like food through the digestive tract. You'll see some in the urinary system propelling urine. But also keep in mind that smooth muscle is what changes the diameter of our small arteries, and that's also really important when you get to the cardiovascular system. So you'll see cardiac muscle, smooth muscle more next semester. We're going to focus here on skeletal muscle. And so we have a big long list of the functions of skeletal muscle. Okay? The first one is perhaps the most obvious, right? That we're producing movement of the body, right? Of the skeleton. And this is because when we look at skeletal muscle, it is all going to be attached through connective tissue, things like tendons, to bone. And when muscle contracts, when it shortens, it then leverages, it pulls on that bone, and that's how we get movement of the skeleton. Skeletal muscle is also super important in maintaining posture, right? If you think about just trying to stand upright, sit upright, holding your head up, right? All of those things are being done by skeletal muscle. When we were in chapter 9 thinking about articulations, we talked about body position, right? And even just, right, if you stand on one foot, you can feel all the little skeletal muscles trying to keep those joints and your body in the appropriate place. Skeletal muscle also supports soft tissues. So if you think about the abdominal wall or the pelvic floor, these are both made of thin, broad sheets of skeletal muscle, but it's still skeletal muscle. People miss that sometimes. Now this can be protective, right? If you get punched in the guts, you'd much rather have that abdominal wall contracted for protection, but it's also just kind of holding in your internal organs, right? If the pelvic floor becomes weak, as odd as it sounds, you can have things like uterine prolapse, where the uterus actually starts to fall out of the body. So this is important. Okay. Guarding body entrances and exits. It felt weird to write sphincter on a PowerPoint, but that's what we're talking about here, right? Are the sphincters, these rings of skeletal muscle that are at the entrances and exits of the body. Now, these are super important because this gives us voluntary control, right? The smooth muscle that, say, makes up the digestive tract or the urinary tract, we do not have control over. But these rings of skeletal muscle are going to give us voluntary control over things like swallowing, defecating, urinating. Maintaining body temperature. So your body temperature is basically as you convert energy from a form like food, like glucose, into ATP. Anytime energy is transferred from one form to another, some of it is lost in the form of heat. This is just a law of physics, but that is actually where you get your body temperature. And so as the skeletal muscles try to produce tons of ATP to support all this movement, they're cranking out a bunch of heat. In fact, about 85% of your body heat comes from skeletal muscle. And then finally, skeletal muscle can also act as this nutrient reserve, right? You have this rich store of amino acids, the precursors, the monomers that make up proteins. And if your diet is deficient in those amino acids, your body will simply remove protein from the skeletal muscle to free up those resources, right? To make antibodies or enzymes or something that it deems more important than having skeletal muscle. Protein, of course, also has calories, and so you can also use skeletal muscle as fuel for the body.